The National Prosecuting Authority says it will prosecute members of the Soweto Special Branch for the Apartheid-era murder of Nokuthula Simelane, who disappeared in 1983. Simelane, who was an ANC underground operative, disappeared in September 1983 in the hands of the Soweto Special Branch. Simelane's family had filed an application before the North Gauteng High Court. They demanded that the court compels the National Director of Public Prosecutions and the Minister of Justice to refer what they believe to be the kidnapping, torture and disappearance and murder of Simelane to a formal inquest. Now, for more on this issue, we are now joined in studio by legal expert Brenda Wardlet. Good evening, Brenda, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Dudu.
Now, Simelane's sister filed an application before the Pretoria High Court to force a formal inquest into her suspected kidnapping, torture and murder. Can you explain the legal terms of this application?
Well, what the inquest route is basically there for is to investigate all unnatural deaths in cases where criminal charges are not prosecuted. What is a bit complicated about this matter is that there were applications at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, not for the murder of Nokuthula, but for the kidnapping, the abduction, the torture, etc. And partial amnesty was basically granted to some of those officers of the Soweto intelligence or special branch unit.
Now, why this now? Why is the case being brought through to the courts now after they've applied to the TRC to get amnesty and moving on from that? Why are they taking that case back and bring it back into the fore?
I think, remember that there are about between 500 and 800 cases which had been referred to the National Prosecuting Authority when the TRC wrapped up their processes. And the NPA ought to have instituted criminal proceedings way back. And in 2005, they attempted to amend the legislation to kind of bring in a second TRC where they would allow perpetrators to enter into plea and sentencing agreements in terms of Section 105 or even become Section 204 witnesses. Now, the High Court struck that and said it was unconstitutional, and therefore there are many relatives out there who haven't found closure, who are awaiting on the National Prosecuting Authority to basically do something about the cases that had been referred to them.
Now, Brenda, does this mean that all the people who sort of got amnesty, do they get prosecuted as well?
Well, remember that the amnesty was for the abduction and torture. The amnesty was not for her murder. So they can still be prosecuted, as the NPA has announced it is going to do, for the murder. So if you are indemnified or granted amnesty for a particular offense, it does not cover you for all offenses, including murder. And remember that the TRC was on a basis of full disclosure, full and frank disclosure. And many people, criticisms which were leveled against that process is that some of those police officers, intelligence operatives, didn't really make full and frank disclosures.
Now, Brenda, what happens to the other crimes that were committed during the apartheid government? Does this open a can of worms?
Well, the application for an inquest in terms of the Inquests Act was not a class action, so it was specifically in relation to Nokuthula. I think the PEPCO 3, etc., all other victims have actually come up and said, but I think it's a good start so that the NPA can actually say, yes, we have sufficient evidence here to continue and prosecute, or we don't have, so that everybody can indeed find closure.
Now, with the NPA, are there any other cases that are likely to come to the fore where the NPA will be forced to sort of re-look at them and open them and sort of go after those people?
Well, they are under statutory obligation because they're sitting, as I said, between 300 and 500 disappearances, possible murders, and those dossiers haven't even been touched, and the cases haven't seen the light of day. And there were many criticisms both against the Mbeki government and the current Zuma government that the NPA under both those presidents didn't really go all the way in bringing closure. So as Desmond Tutu refers to it as the unfinished business of the TRC.
Now, Brenda, 1983, we
Yes.
are in 2016. A lot of
Yes.
time has passed during that era. Constitutionally, are they able to pursue this case? And, you know, in your view, will they have enough evidence to work on this case?
If we go back, although a magistrate's court doesn't bind other courts, if we look at the murder of Francis Rasuche, where it was held in our courts that you could convict on murder purely on circumstantial evidence, but obviously that circumstantial evidence has to be compelling. Remember, some of the submissions made at the TRC was that Nokuthula had been killed by MK operatives, and this was basically denied by others. So there was that conflict, and I found it strange that they actually granted amnesty. But crimes such as murders don't prescribe. So obviously, the accused persons might argue their right to a speedy trial, that they ought to have been tried then and not now. But I think that there's a good chance that the matter will at least get to court and be prosecuted.
Now, Brenda, you have experts who've come out and said almost all the amnesty applicants misled the TRC.
Yes.
Now, not admitting to murder, for instance.
Yes.
What is your take on this? And is there anything that can happen after this, especially looking at Nokuthula's case?
Yes.
Is this going to open a can of worms where other cases are going to be re-looked at, or is it, yes, it's done, we spoke about it, let's move on? People didn't make admissions and they misled the TRC, where to from now?
You see, the problem with the TRC process is that there are almost three camps, if I may put it that way. Those who felt that they were, you know, coming up and protecting the Nationalist Party government, those from the liberation movements. If you remember, there was a move to block even the report from within the ANC, and President Nelson Mandela went against the ANC and said the report has to be made public. So on the one hand, you have people who are saying we were waging a war against an unjust and cruel regime, and on the other side, you have people who were saying we were acting on the orders of the Nationalist Party government. But then we've got the victims, their relatives, who want closure. And these are the people where it's unfair to say, let's move along, this is a democracy. And it's quite troubling that 20-odd years, in Nokuthula's case, it's in excess of 32 years, that we are still stuck with unfinished business from the TRC.
Brenda, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Good evening.